Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this classic retro Chaos Beastman in a more modern painting style. So the first thing I've done is I primed the model black, as this will give us a nice even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. And now the first thing I'm doing is I'm coming in with some dryad bark. I'm going to paint all of the wooden handle to his weapon. So just make sure you cover all of this wood with a couple of coats of dryad bark to build up to a nice solid base colour. And once we've covered all of that wood with a couple of coats of dryad bark, you can see we've got a nice smooth, even cover all over the handle to his weapon. And now with some Mournfang brown, I'm going to come in, I'm going to paint all of the hair and fur on the model. So that will be areas here, like this mohawk at the top of his head, as well as any hair coming down his neck and his goatee, as well as the bits around his hooves and his legs. You don't need to worry about being neat at this stage, just make sure you cover all of that hair with a couple of layers of Mournfang brown. The reason we're doing this step first is because we're going to be dry brushing, which is quite a messy method of painting, so we don't want to get this over any areas that we've already painted, so by painting these first we don't have to worry about that. And after a couple of coats of Mournfang brown, you can see we've built up to a nice solid base coat all over the model. So now with some Nuln oil, I'm going to come in and shade all of the areas we painted with dryad bark. Going to catch this with some Nuln oil so it sinks into all of the recesses. And with some Agrax Earth shade, I'm going to shade all of the hair and fur that we painted with Mournfang brown. So once again, just get this over all of the areas we painted and shade them all with a little bit of Agrax Earth shade. Once those shades have dried, sunk into the recesses and add some definition to those areas. Now with some Baneblade brown, I'm going to come in and dry brush all over the wood. Try not to get this over any of the fur we've painted with Mournfang brown, but just catch all of the wood to his weapon with a dry brush of Baneblade brown. And with that Baneblade brown applied, you can see it's picked out all of the details on the wooden shaft to his weapon. And so now with some Rhinox hide, I'm going to come in and dry brush the areas of fur that are closest to his skin. So it'll be areas here like the tops, these areas on his legs, and the lower part of his mohawk, catching these just to darken down those hairs closest to his skin. And then with some Steel Legion drab, I'm going to come in and dry brush the areas that are furthest away from his skin. So it'll be the top of the mohawk and the bottom of the bits on his legs and his hooves. This will give us a nice gradient from dark to light on his hair, helping give the impression of it growing lighter as it grows longer. And now with some Baylor brown, I'm going to come in and dry brush over those areas we just dry brushed before. And with that Baylor brown applied, it's added a transition to that fur, making it go from dark to light. And so now after those dry brushes, I'm going to come in with some Bugman's Glow. I'm going to paint all of the skin on the model. See, a lot of this model is flesh, so really take your time for this step. Make sure you pick out all of the areas of skin being careful not to get this over any of the fur that we've already painted and dry brushed, but just in a couple of layers, build up to a nice solid colour of Bugman's Glow all over all of the skin of the model. With so much of this model being skin, it really is the main focal point of the model, so we're going to spend a little bit of time on it just to make sure we get this skin looking really good. So just work your way around the model in a couple of thin layers of Bugman's Glow, build up to a nice solid base colour of Bugman's Glow all over that skin. It's definitely after the first coat going to be a little bit patchy. Just come in with a second coat of Bugman's Glow and build up to a nice solid colour. And after a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow, you can see we've built up to a nice solid base colour all over that skin on the model. So now with some Reichland Flesh Shade, I'm going to come in and shade all of that skin. Once again, being nice and careful, making sure I don't get this over any of the fur we've already painted and highlighted. But all over that skin, I'm going to come in with a shade of Reichland Flesh Shade and shade the skin. And after that shade has dried, you can see it's really added definition into all of those recesses and around all of those muscles, all over his skin. So now with some Bugman's Glow again, I'm going to come in and start highlighting the skin. So for this, I'm coming in wherever the Reichland Flesh Shade has settled in a recess, I'm coming in on either side of that recess and bringing it back up to its original colour. So areas here around the face, you can see where the shade's settled into all of these grooves. So I'm coming in on either side of that and raising all of these raised areas back up to our original Reichland Flesh Shade colour. By keeping your paint nice and thin at this step, it'll allow a little bit of that darker colour to show through and help add some transitions on the skin as we build up towards our highlight. So just work your way around the model on all of these raised muscles and areas like this. Come in, put some Bugman's Glow on all of the raised areas, but leaving that shade paint in all of the recesses to add some brightness back into the model. And after we've applied that Bugman's Glow, you can see it has brightened those areas, but leaving the darker areas in all of the recesses. So now I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. I'm going to apply this onto all of the areas we just applied the pure Bugman's Glow. So for this, you want to be applying it sort of in the middle of all of those previous steps, but focusing slightly towards the higher and most raised points where the light would catch the most. So just work your way back around the model again, apply a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas we just applied the Bugman's Glow. On areas here like his shoulder, I'm going to focus much more on the top of it to make that the brightest area, so it will get darker as it moves down his body and into areas of shadow. Once again, keep your paint nice and thin at this stage, so it allows a little bit of the previous colours to show through, makes a nice soft transition up to our brighter colours. On areas here like his chest, I'm going to pick out the tops of these muscles, leaving a little bit of Bugman's Glow showing on either side, and the Reichland Flesh Shade showing in the recesses. And after we've applied that mix, you can see it's brightened up those areas a little bit more, and really put the focus of the light onto the tops of all of the muscles. So now with some pure Cadian flesh tone, I'm going to come in again and once again applying this in the middle of where we just applied the previous colours, focusing this really onto the raised areas, most prominent points, to build up to a really nice bright highlight. Once again, keep this nice and thin and build up that transition to our brightest highlight. You can see here on his chest, I'm focusing this onto the most raised and prominent points, leaving that Cadian flesh tone showing around the sides, so we're getting a nice smooth transition on the skin tone. And with that Cadian flesh tone applied, it's really added some transitions onto the skin. Now there's just one final highlight left to apply. And that'll be with some Kislev flesh. I'm going to come in and pick out the edges of all the most sharp and raised points. So wherever there's a prominent line or fold or edge of a muscle, I'm coming in with a little thin edge highlight of Kislev flesh and just picking that out to really add some interest to the edges of all the muscles. This will make them all stand out and look really prominent on the model without being too stark. So just take your time, work your way around the model. On the edge of every muscle and every raised edge and prominent fold, put a thin line of Kislev flesh just to highlight all of those muscles. I'm also going to pick out the knuckles to his fingers, giving those a spot highlight of Kislev flesh on all of his knuckles. And with that Kislev flesh applied, that is the skin highlighted. So the next step we're going to do is painting his eyes. So to paint his eyes, first of all I'm coming in with some Abaddon black. I'm going to sink a little bit of this into the recesses of his eye sockets, being nice and neat, not getting this over any of the skin, but just sinking it into those recesses for his eyes. And now with some white scar, I'm going to come in and put a really thin line within that black we just applied. And with some Abaddon black again, I'm going to come in and put a vertical line through the middle of that white, which will act like a pupil. And with those eyes painted, that is the skin and the face finished off on the model. So now it's time to start painting in the rest of the details. So the first thing I'm going to do is come in with some corn red. I'm going to paint all of the fabric on the model. So it's this loincloth here hanging down by his waist. I'm going to catch this with a couple of coats of corn red. I'm also going to paint this strapping on his weapon with a couple of coats of corn red as well. Obviously being nice and neat when I'm around the skin. Trying not to get this over any of the areas we've already painted and highlighted. And after a couple of layers of corn red, you can see we've built up a nice smooth, even base coat all over those areas of fabric. So now I'm going to come in with some Corvus black. I'm going to paint the belt on the model. So it's just this belt going here around his waist. Just going to pick all of that out with a layer of Corvus black. And with the belt picked out, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the little pouch that's hanging from his waist. So for this, I'm going to use some Rhinox hide, and I'm just going to cover this little pouch tucked in here under his arm with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide. This will give us a nice dark leather look to the pouch. Once again, being nice and careful around the fur and the skin. And with that pouch painted, the next step is I'm going to move on and start painting some of the metallic areas on the model. So first of all, with some lead belcher, I'm going to come in and paint the head of his weapon here. Just going to catch this with a couple of layers of lead belcher all over the head to his weapon. And with the lead belcher applied, the next thing I'm going to pick out is any of the gold details on the model. So for this, I'm using Retributor armor. I'm going to pick out any parts I want to be gold. So that'll be this buckle here in the middle of his belt, as well as any studs that are on the belt as well. I'll pick these out with a couple of layers of Retributor armor. These rings on his wrists as well, I'm going to pick these out with a couple of layers of Retributor armor as well. And the rings on the head of his weapon, just to break up that silver a little bit. I'll just catch these with some Retributor armor. And with the gold details picked out, that's the next set of base coats applied. So now we're going to shade those areas. So I'm coming in with some Nuln oil first. For this, I'm going to shade all of the areas we painted corn red, Corvus black, Rhinox hide, and lead belcher. So it'll be everything we just painted, other than the gold details. Give all of these a shade of Nuln oil. And with some Agrax Earthshade, I'm going to shade all the areas we just painted gold. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And with those areas shaded, you can see it's added definition to those parts all over the model. So the first thing I'm going to start highlighting is the fabric. So for that, I'm coming in with corn red again. And much like with the skin, I'm going to apply this to all of the raised areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever the Nuln oil's in a recess, coming in on either side of it and painting it with a thin layer of corn red to bring it back to colour. Do this for both the loincloth and the strapping on the weapon, just leaving the Nuln oil in the recesses and bringing the raised areas back up to corn red. And with the corn red applied, it started the transition from dark to light on these areas. So now with a 50-50 mix of corn red and Mephiston red, I'm going to come in and apply this in the middle of the areas that we just applied the corn red. Once again, keep this nice and thin, focus it onto the most raised points, and just apply a little bit of this mix in the areas we just applied the previous step. You want to leave a bit of the corn red showing and apply this in the middle so you build up that nice smooth transition to our lighter highlight colours. And you can see with that mix applied, it's starting to build up that transition to a lighter colour. So the next step is I'm coming in with some pure Mephiston red. And once again, I'm going to apply this in the middle of the areas we just applied that mix. So really focus this onto the most raised areas and prominent points. And apply a little bit of pure Mephiston red onto all those raised areas. And with that Mephiston red applied, there's just one final colour left to apply to highlight all of the fabric. And that will be some Evil Sunz Scarlet, which I'm going to apply as an edge highlight on all the sharpest points of the fabric. So all the prominent folds, edges to all the creases, I'm coming in with a little bit of Evil Sunz Scarlet and applying an edge highlight to all of these areas. Try and keep these lines nice and thin and just catch all of the edges with a thin line of Evil Sunz Scarlet. And with that edge highlight applied, there's all of the fabric areas on the model highlighted. So now with some Rhinox hide, I'm going to come in and start highlighting that pouch. So much like before, areas that the shade has settled and darkened down, I'm coming in on either side and applying just a little bit of Rhinox hide to bring it back up to colour. Now this is only a small area, so there isn't a whole lot to paint with the Rhinox hide. Just make sure you catch the raised areas with a layer. Now with a 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and Gorthor brown, I'm going to come in and apply this in the middle of the areas we just applied the Rhinox hide. These are going to be some very small areas, but just catch them with a little bit of this mix. As you can see, that's brightened up some areas on that pouch and given it the appearance of worn leather. So I'm just coming in with some pure Gorthor brown. I'm just going to do an edge highlight on the most raised and prominent parts. So just a thin line of pure Gorthor brown as an edge highlight. And with that Gorthor brown applied, that's that pouch highlighted. So the next thing I'm going to do is highlight the black on his belt. And for this, I'm coming in with Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm just going to do a chunky edge highlight on the tops and bottoms of his belt. After the chunky edge highlight, I'm going to come in with some Dawnstone and apply a thin edge highlight right at the very edge, leaving a little bit of that Mechanica Standard Grey showing through. So just add some interest to that belt, rather than just a stark, straight edge highlight. And with the Dawnstone applied, that is the belt highlighted. So next thing I'm going to do is move on to highlighting some of the metallics. So with some Stormhost Silver, I'm going to come in and apply an edge highlight to all of the areas we painted with Lead Belcher. So it will just be the head of his weapon, just coming in and applying a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver on all the sharp edges to his weapon. I'm just going to trace every edge with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver to make it look like the light is catching. And with that Stormhost Silver applied, it's given the impression of light catching with sharp points on his weapon. Now we're going to highlight the gold details. So for this I'm coming in with Liberator Gold. I'm going to apply this as a spot edge highlight to the tips of all the areas here on this Chaos Star. I'm going to apply a thin band in the middle of all of the rings we painted gold as well. So just try and catch the most raised point with a thin edge highlight of Liberator Gold. And with the gold highlighted, all that's left to do now is to go through and pick out some of the other details that we've left on the model. So the first of these I'm going to pick out is his teeth and his claws. So for these I'm coming in with some white scar. And I'm just going to catch any of the visible teeth in his mouth, just catching these very carefully with a little bit of white scar. And any of his claws or nails, I'm just going to pick these out with a bit of white scar as well. And with those details picked out, the model is really starting to come together now. But the next little subtle detail I'm going to pick out is the hairband in his hair. So for this I'm coming in with some Corvus Black again. And I'm just going to pick out this tie here in his hair with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. And then with some Skaven Blight Dinge, I'm just going to apply an edge highlight on the tips and most raised points of that hairband. And with that detail picked out, the only thing left to paint now is his horns and his hooves. So for these, I'm coming in with Ushabti Bone. I'm going to apply a couple of layers to build up to a nice solid base coat on his hooves and his horns. It will take a couple of layers to build to a solid coat, but just be nice and neat around other details and pick out these areas with some Ushabti Bone. So on these ones here on his head, be nice and neat around the rest of the skin details, but make sure you cover all of the horns with a couple of layers of Ushabti Bone. And after a couple of layers of Ushabti Bone, we've picked out those hooves and the horns. So now with some Zamassy Desert, I'm going to start adding some lines onto these details. So for the hooves, I'm just doing some vertical lines, starting near the top of the hooves and coming all the way down to the bottom. Keep them nice and thin. I'm going to do the same on the horns as well. I'm tracing these around the curve to the horn, applying a thin line as a Zamassy Desert a couple of times on each horn. After we've applied those first lines, now we're going to come in with some XV88 and we're going to apply a line within the one we've just applied and starting a little bit further down on the horns and the hooves. So all of the lines that we just applied, put a little bit of XV88 within that line, tracing it all the way up to the tips of the horns and the bottom of the hooves. Just make sure you start a little bit further down the horn than you did for the Zamassy Desert. And now with some Mournfang Brown, I'm going to repeat this step again, but starting even further down the horn. So at this point you want to be in about the last third of the horn or so. And once again applying this within the line of our previous one. This will give us those transitions on the lines, give it the appearance of growing horn, aging as it grows. And now with some Rhinox hide, I'm going to come in and in sort of the last little bit of each horn, I'm going to apply a thin line of Rhinox hide within the lines we've already applied to really darken down these tips of these lines, give the appearance of some age to the horns. And with those lines applied, it's given that transition to the growth lines on the horns and the hooves. So now with some Baylor Brown, which I'm going to thin down with quite a bit of water. I'm going to apply this almost like a pin shade into any of the recesses. So on these hooves, this bit here in the front, and on the horns, it's in all of the recesses. And these lines here that stretch across the horn, I'm catching each one of these out with a little pin shade of Baylor Brown. And with that pin shade applied, it's added some definition to those horns and added a bit more interest. So now there's just one final step to apply to this model. And that's to come in with some white scar. I'm going to add some little lines in between all of the lines we've just done. On the hooves at the very tops, it's between each of those lines we've just applied. On the horns here, in each of these segments, I'm going to apply a little line between all of the other lines we've painted on our horns. This will just give the impression of new growth and add some interest to the model. And with that applied, that is how to paint this classic 90s Chaos Beastmen in a much more modern painting style. So please let me know in the comments down below, what are your favourite classic Warhammer models from the 90s? Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and you may have noticed that a join button has just appeared at the bottom of the screen as well. If you'd like to support me in making more of these painting guides and painting challenges, and if you can afford to throw me a couple of dollars, click on the join button. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and happy painting!